Welcome, everyone. I'm Deirdre Mendez. I am the director of the Center for Global Business, and we are delighted to have you with us for our current Global Shift Dialogues conversation. And this is a really exciting one. I'm just really pleased to be joined here by two wonderful experts in the global economy, people who are working for global companies now, but who have vast experience from other companies and other geographies and other industries throughout their careers. So they are really tremendously knowledgeable and very experienced across multiple types of conversations that we could have. So we're just going to jump in and we'll start with a conversation about our topic this evening, and then we'll take questions towards the end. So I'm delighted to have two, as I said, experienced guests. Tonight, we are joined by Shannon Trille-Kempner, and Shannon's the Vice President of Corporate Responsibility and Diversity and Inclusion at Catalent Pharma Solutions. So her work focuses squarely on ESG strategies for the company. Shannon, I know that given Catalent's work directly related to COVID-19 vaccines, you are right now in the eye of the hurricane. So thank you very much for being here. And Al Langto is the Executive Director at Lenovo, and Lenovo is a consumer electronics and enterprise systems company headquartered in Beijing. And Al, I know you've worked for many years in the electronics industry for US-based companies as well. So I know that you bring a diverse perspective to this discussion. And so we're going to be talking about ESG. The title of our topic is, I'm going to let some people into the waiting room, from the waiting room, and then I will get back to us. Okay. So our topic this evening is the pivot to ESG, the pivot to environment, society, and governance orientation in business. And this is something that really the level at which this is being discussed is new, really. Something that I couldn't have really imagined 2 years ago, when ESG was sort of a peripheral or marginal consideration, and now all of a sudden it's front and center everywhere. And there have been tremendous and a tremendous increase in pressure on companies to embrace ESG for a number of reasons. So from the society perspective, companies are being pressured due to the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are now front and center for companies in terms of reporting and also their responsibilities to their employees and what's expected of them. Of course, global warming and other environmental concerns, environmental degradation is really ramping that discussion up, and governance issues of all types, transparency, and so on have become huge. And then there's the fact that ESG stocks have performed very well during the pandemic. And so all of that has kind of created a perfect storm around this issue. So for all those reasons, companies are experiencing tremendous pressure to disclose and report ESG strategies. So now, without going into any more detail about the context, I will begin with the questions that I have for Al and Shannon. And my first question is this: given the increased importance of ESG factors in companies' reputations and financial opportunities, there's a lot of pressure to articulate proactive ESG strategies. So Al, do you mind starting? What aspects of ESG are you emphasizing in your work, and what constituencies are you sharing those strategies with? Who's putting pressure on you?
Yeah, well, thanks, Deidre. Appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for joining. I'd love to see all the faces. All of you have your cameras on, and I hope a fair number of you are using Lenovo computers, I would say, first off. So, but we all need technology. We all use technology. And I would say you have to break up the ESG into three components, right? There's three major components. And within ESG, I think we all feel right now, all three are really important, but the environmental side of it is probably getting the most attention from us. And so we've just published this month, I think it was this month or last month, our 15th annual ESG report. And this one's 140 pages. And I would invite you to spend your evenings over the next several weeks, maybe taking a look at it and to see what I think to be a really good ESG report looks like. There's lots of goals. There's some very harsh self-critiques in there in terms of how we're doing. But I would say certainly with the world the way it is right now, with the focus on the environment and global warming, that certainly the environmental part of this is really, really important. So we look at this, I think all of us have all heard of ISO 9001, which is the quality metric that was very prevalent back in the day. And right now, a more prevalent one related to this topic is ISO 14001. And that's one really focused on environmental. And that's the one that we really adhere to within our business and our company, really focusing. We're in 160 countries. We manufacture all over the world. And so, that one becomes, very important to us and to our stakeholders.
And Al, who are your stakeholders that want to know about this? Obviously, your annual report, you're reporting to investors and regulators and so on. What about internally? Yeah, so, our CEO just recently, gave us an update on how we're doing against ESG. So I think, as employees, we all want to know, what we're doing and how we're responding to the pressure from the environmental folks, from the social people focus on social issues, focus on governance issues. So all of us want to feel proud of where we go, right? Everybody wants to feel proud of the university. We want to feel proud of our company. So we want to know what's going on. And the other side of it is when I meet with our customers, so I'm a salesperson. I'm not an expert like Shannon is in this space. But when I talk to my customers want to know what we're doing in ESG. And so we have a slide that we show every time, our slides, that whether they want to see them or not, we usually push them in front of our customers to let them know that we do care. And this is important to us as a company. And we're really proud of what we're doing in that space. So those are two very important ones. And of course, everywhere we operate, the communities in which we live, our community leaders want to know what we're doing, and we want to be very proud of our contributions. So we have dual headquarters. We have, as Deidre was saying, we're headquartered partly in Beijing and partly in Mooresville, North Carolina. So right up the road from many folks that live in the southeast part of the U.S. And so we're right there. And so we have two very important stakeholders and governments that we're responding to, plus in all the different countries in which we operate. All right, thank you. So Shannon, I think your answer is probably going to be a little different. And I'm dying to hear what you're doing at Catalent. Different space, pharmaceuticals, different stakeholders, different issues. What's going on with your company?
Sure. First, I was smiling with the 140-page corporate responsibility report. By way of introduction of Catalent, we are a 6-year-old public company, which in terms of CR report length means we're at about 50. Catalent, though, before I jump into ESG, if I may, just to explain what we are in the pharmaceutical sector, but we are a B2B, and we are a major supplier to the pharmaceutical sector. And we're what's called technically a CDMO, Contract Development and Manufacturing Organization. So what it means is that our customers are the pharmaceuticals, the big ones, like you may know these days, like Pfizer, J&J, AstraZeneca, Moderna, just to borrow on the COVID theme, as well as venture pharmaceutical companies, upstarts, scientists in a garage with a great molecule that they think can improve or save a life. We have kind of a range of customers. And what we do is we develop, deliver, and supply and manufacture. So I'm going to very quickly go through those 4. Manufacturing means taking a pharmaceutical technology like mRNA vaccines or a standard medicine to commercial scale. So right now, if you Google Catalent, not many people know it, so I've got it really big here on the screen. We're mostly in the news because we invested in this new technology called mRNA delivery of a drug in 2019, which is just a year, of course, before the coronavirus pandemic hit. And so we are a significant part of the manufacturing firepower behind the mRNA vaccines right now. And in fact, I'm speaking to you from Bloomington, Indiana, which is like the epicenter in the United States of vaccine manufacturing. We also do drug development. And so we help, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's a large pharma or two scientists with their molecule, really take a drug and an idea through phase trial and ideally to market if that happens. We also have a clinical supply service, which means that we provide the logistics of discovering a drug and taking it through that phase, again, that phase trial period. So there's the actual development, the laboratory, the technology, scientific piece of drug development, and then there's taking it through the regulatory process. Both of those are services that Catalent offers. I'll stop there, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of the key capabilities of Catalent in the larger pharmaceutical sector. ESG, so environment, social, and governance, is what internally we call it living into our values. It's how we operate in alignment with the values that we have set and the behaviors we have set for ourselves. And our ESG strategy are the proof points that it is not just important what we do, right? The patients that we serve, or the drugs and treatments we help develop, the profit we make, or the jobs we create, but how we do it matters. The ESG, if you ask me the question about which ESG issues matter most before 2020, climate in alignment with Al, I think almost any company is really looking at its role in climate change, and as well as a variety, an extended kind of definition of environmental impacts. So right now, carbon emissions is incredibly a focus point for us, both because of the investors who are investing in us or want us as part of their social portfolio, and customers. Our customers, especially the big pharmas, are under a lot of pressure for their impact on the environment, and they want a manufacturing and development partner who aligns with their values and doesn't extend, their supply chain is also their footprint. So Catalent's footprint is Pfizer's footprint, right? Catalent's footprint is Moderna's footprint. And so really being able to express that we understand the values and expectations of our customers and minimizing our own impact is increasingly important. With coronavirus, I would say two things came into high relief. One is people, and we have a people value about that, that human-centered focus of the company and the people that we impact, whether it's the patients that need safe, reliable medicines made, and our own people, of course. So not only did we have 70% of our people, which was primarily the manufacturing portion of our company, that labeled appropriately, categorized as essential workers and on the line. We didn't stop during coronavirus because we could not stop. And not just for COVID vaccines, but for other medicines. So how do we keep our plants online, but keep people from getting coronavirus and getting sick? So that value and that need to demonstrate our commitment to our people themselves who are scared to come to work. Right, most of us have at least access to a vaccine now, but those early days, I think it's so easy to forget how scary it was to come into the office. So our people value focus and how we keep them safe has become into high relief, as well as the reliability of the supply chain. And I won't go into this now. I know we'll have time to discuss later, but I'm so sorry. I'm going to back up to people. In the middle of coronavirus, George Floyd was murdered. And while it happened in the United States, it had reverberations across the world. And those most impacted by coronavirus were communities who were saying, we need social justice and we need equity. And so we had this 2-point piece where we were on the line, keeping people safe, but really having a reckoning within our own company about our own justice and how we're performing with equity and inclusion. That happened at the same time. And again, later I can share more on that. But I was skipping past that people point without the most important social justice issue conversation inside and out of the last 2 years. And then I'll wrap up in terms of issues important to our stakeholders, which is supply chain reliability. That means being able to get the materials and supplies we need to deliver to patients and to our customers. You may have heard, for example, of a glass shortage. Well, how do you know? It doesn't matter how much vaccine you're making. If you don't have vials to deliver them in, we have a problem. And that actually happened, right, during coronavirus. And so really understanding the reliability of our suppliers was important. However, given geopolitical dynamics, East and West supply chains are separating and wanting to become independent from each other, which creates, I think, a new level of how are we going to create a supply chain that's reliable, ethical, and can deliver. So climate, people with a deep diversity, equity, and inclusion angle, and supply chain reliability and responsibility would be the three issues that we're dealing with and engaging with our stakeholders.
Great, thank you. Both those points were so interesting. And Shannon, you mentioned a sort of a catalytic moment. There have been many really in the last couple of years. One of them was the murder of George Floyd, and there have been others. And they've kind of moved, those issues have, I think, kind of moved our conversations in new directions. Al, are you seeing are you having different kinds of conversations now than you were before? Are you seeing emphasis on different things sort of throughout the workplace? Before, when we talked, you mentioned your teams and people. How is that showing up for you?
Well, again, all these, it's hard, it's almost like 1A, 1B, 1C for us, I think, in terms of all, being important. And so it's hard to say which ones are really different. They're all different, right? I think there's so many events that Shannon was talking about that have impacted all of us. And I mean, you'd be, I'm going to say, dead or something if you didn't react differently, right? You'd have to. So when we look at how we've reacted differently, I think there's, again, I've mentioned already about the E part, enhanced environmental awareness, big event taking place in Scotland coming up, talk about the climate, it remains. And as a manufacturer, building things and producing things that hold in your hand, they get warm, they use energy, what's our responsibilities there? That remains a top focus. On the social side, certainly as was mentioned, all the events that have taken place, in the United States and then have compounded or echoed around the world, it certainly caused the company to continue to evaluate or reevaluate how we do things. So we've had our, the multiple events around courageous conversations internally, really addressing, looking at ourselves in the mirror, and we doing all we can. In our industry, in the technology industry, it's traditionally been a very male-dominated industry, right? It just somehow has drawn those males into this industry. So we've really looked much harder at, looking at our female-male diversity and what we can do both at the entry level and all the way through the executive ranks. Certainly the tragedies that have taken place that we've all witnessed have, focused on broader definitions of diversity. And the thing that's interesting is, as we think about this, and I know that this group is probably a very international group, is that, what means diversity here is different in another country. Right? It's not the same around the world. And so one thing we do have to be careful about is we don't export only an American or only a Asian view of what diversity is. Diversity could be different things. There's differences by religion, differences by caste, by class, race. But male-female has been a very constant one around the world almost. That's probably more of a universal issue that companies have to deal with and try to make sure we're giving opportunities for female leadership. But again, so we have to be really careful as we, try to just take one view of what diversity is. And I think our company is really doing that. We're trying to understand in each of the local markets we serve. If you're in Germany, I know there's a difference between like the Turkish group and the German group, and that's a struggle they have. And in UK, it's more around class. And then in our world, also on the governance side, we're all where your stuff is manufactured. Shannon was talking about it. Your customers want to have trust in your supply chain. They want to know where you manufacturing things. And we can look around the world. There's lots of manufacturers that have gotten in trouble where they weren't monitoring closely enough. Some second, third, fourth tier manufacturer that was doing something that was not in accordance with what we had asked them to do or they had pledged to do. And so you have to be extra vigilant all the time and, and be able to willing to take financial losses and commercial losses when you find a supplier that hasn't been doing things according to the standards we've all agreed to. and we've done that in the past. So so all those things are. I think in the era of social media, there is no fault or flaw that you can have for long without it being exposed. And so part of this is, one, proactively, avoiding those situations, because we want to do the right things, and then reacting very quickly if something does turn up that either in your own internal audits or through somebody else's observations that you say, okay, yes, we need to take action. So I think that a key thing for all of us is that everything's exposed, and that's healthy, I think.
Shannon, what do you have to add to that?
I think everything Al says resonates with me. I think building on the diversity piece, I would say that yes, every culture, context in the world has its definition. And I would add that kind of diversity without inclusion is an absolute kind of missed opportunity. And so I think you can define diversity in many ways, and we do. And I think this is the conversation we are having right now as a company, that diversity and inclusion, and I'm not suggesting Lenovo or anyone is doing this at all. It's more just the way that we think about it at Catalent. Diversity and inclusion is not for like a special program for minority groups. This is, we all as people want to come and be our full selves, and it be safe to do so in order to unleash our gifts and talents and experiences into the innovation and environment of the company, right? And for us to serve patients more. And I think we're really figuring out a way to make sure that inclusion unites us and the diversity kind of strengthens us. And how do you find the balance in that discussion, but also have kind of a non-negotiable about it in terms of, well, this is our values and this is what we've committed to, no matter where you are in the world or whatever the diversity topic may be. I am just coming back from my first overseas trip for work. I was in Germany, Italy, and France having this discussion about what inclusion means and what diversity means, and it was fascinating. So I think the upshot here is that companies are less and less insulated by what is happening outside their doors, and their ability to understand that there are social risks. And again, I go back, ESG is how it's investor speak, right? So it's an investor function to show how you as a company are sophisticated enough and on top of it enough to manage what's from outside coming into your company. And how will you navigate these dynamics outside, whether it's a global pandemic, whether it's a global social justice movement, right? Whether it's or climate change. And so I think companies who are more transparent and more in front of the trends and managing it versus kind of a put your head in the sand, oh, that's business, that's outside, that's other, your identity is outside, you behave a certain way. Those barriers and differences are no longer there, and it's changing quickly. And so I think ESG is about how you communicate to your stakeholders that you're on top of it. You know what's happening, and you are turning what could be a challenge into an opportunity and sustainability for your company by being transparent and by managing the issues of the day. So I kind of summarized what Al said, I think.
Well, thank you. I think we keep hearing the word unprecedented. We are living in an unprecedented time. But what's interesting, I think, too, is that this isn't going to be over. That is to say, next year, we're going to have an unprecedented time. And the year after that will be unprecedented. The year after that will be unprecedented. The idea that there's some kind of normal and that we know what the rules are is going away. And as you say, that's really blurring the boundaries between what's internal to the corporation and what's happening outside. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity. We have a lot of students in this audience, and making sure that you are preparing yourself to deal with situations for which the rules aren't yet written is very important. You are going to be responsible. If you have any kind of leadership responsibilities moving forward, you are going to be responsible for writing those rules, for developing policies in environments where the guidelines are very either non-existent or shifting. And that's a really big responsibility. And now is the time to take classes, to have conversations, to be involved in that kind of dialogue. So thank you so much, both of you, for introducing those concepts. So I'm also curious, just generally speaking, what aspects of ESG compliance are most challenging? I think I probably know the answer to that. I'm guessing climate change, just because it's so intractable and it's not an HR kind of issue, and it's big and the pressure's huge and all of that. But I'd like to just hear from you. Do you agree with that, or in your particular industry or company, are you seeing something different?
If I'm going first again, yeah, I guess for a manufacturer of PCs and such, it is, because not only do our products take energy and potentially harm the climate to produce, they also use energy. So we're constantly working on all aspects of manufacturing, what we manufacture with, how we manufacture, what energy we use to manufacture. When you get into the parlance of the industry, there's a scope 1, 2, and 3 kind of effects that you try to manage. And we're trying to manage all three. So not only how we manufacture and what energy we use, what products we use, but who we buy from, the energy we use and how we do that. So we're committed to getting to 90% renewable energies in our manufacturing. And then we also try to manage also the energy used to transport our products, right? All of you receive these products, from our factories through, on ships, on planes, on through trucks. And so we're looking at all aspects, and then we want to get the products back from you, right? So we can recycle them and reuse them. So a lot of the stuff around when you're manufacturing physical things that take lots of components, use lots of different chemicals and lots of different components, we have, it's a constant motion that we're always in, trying to think about how to do it better, more ecologically sound. And then we look at things too, going back a little bit what Shannon was talking about, we're also, focusing more about, how is our product used? Can all different types of people use our products the same way, regardless of what your particularly disability might be? So we're putting more and more of our products through testing labs with people that are, very different than, maybe some of the people on this call that have different needs. So we're constantly challenging ourselves to make them better, make them more useful, make them more functional, make them last longer. And that's where the quality of our products comes into play. Nobody wants to have a computer that you got to recycle every year. You want these things to last a long time. We also are manufacturing Motorola phones. You may have heard that brand. That's one of our brands, along with ThinkPad and ThinkSystems. And those are products that we have great pride in, but we want these things to be made the right way and brought back to us in the right way so we can dispose of them or reuse them. And one more piece I'll add is that we even think about how we service our products. There's this notion of you got to deploy somebody to come help you, fix your machine. And that takes energy and time and pollutes the environment, people driving around, and waste time. So we're trying to get more better and better at remote fixing of products so that you don't have to go somewhere and take your product. We don't have to come visit you. It's also safer in this world of COVID. We don't have to see each other face to face. And so there's lots of things that we do in that regard to try to make sure that our products are, again, manufactured with the least amount of impact to the environment, and then that we can bring them back into our own control so we can repurpose them or dispose of them in the proper way.
I would.
Shannon, I'm imagining you have some really interesting challenges because pharmaceutical products have very specific requirements. I keep thinking of the Pfizer vaccine, which has to be refrigerated at a very low temperature. And I don't know how much leeway you have there. So trying to manage that at the same time, be as environmentally friendly as possible must be a challenge.
Yes. So definitely, let me pause. I'm going to pull out for a moment, maybe be cynical and provocative. As with all social impact issues, and especially social impact issues in business, where businesses want an ROI that is defined, there are a lot of people who call BS on the entire ESG sector, saying you really can't measure, is this greenwashing? Is this whitewashing? So the high level challenge to me is the world and the globe for any issue, and especially climate, can we agree on what success looks like? Is it a meaningful, like who's making the decisions of what success looks like? And are those really meaningful metrics and will they have impacts? So I just want to name that. And I think to be in the ESG sector without really understanding the doubt and the criticism would be to be blind, right? You would be no use to your company if you're not aware of what doesn't work always with ESG. So I wanted to just name that. So I think the world agreeing on metrics for the most important issues is a challenge. And within that, building where Al is, there are actually now pretty and increasingly clear and precise ways you measure. Let's just use carbon, and we're not even talking about water, waste. I mean, there's every sector, but carbon seems to be the hyper focus right now. And the easier, there are 3 different areas of carbon. Al mentioned scope 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to get too technical, I promise. So hang with me here. I'll make my point, which is scope 1 and 2 are pretty easy to measure. Scope 1 is carbon that's released as the direct result of your operations. 2 is basically the energy you pull to run your business. So Lenovo is trying to get to 90% renewable energy sources. We are at that level also. But scope 3, which is 70% of the carbon footprint, is how customers, as Al said, use your product and that impact, how suppliers who work for you, the carbon they use to deliver. It is so opaque and it is huge. It is the iceberg under the tip that you see on top. And it is very obscure and it is very hard to measure, and it is the biggest carbon footprint. And so just to add some realism here, I think that most companies, or at least S&P 500 or Fortune 5, have figured out and are measuring scope 1 and 2, who collectively are about 30%. And these are general numbers, so 30% of the carbon emission from the corporate sector. But there's a 70% that is so hard to measure, and we are still mapping our scope 3 at the request of our customers. So great progress has been made related to direct energy use or emission. There is still so much further to go to really measure precisely, and I don't know if we have time. So I think that is what is challenging, is measuring that. I would say the same is true for diversity and inclusion. If you have a definition of inclusion, equity, and diversity, what does that mean across the different contexts of your business? And if you look really closely, a lot of people aren't sharing those numbers. So there's a lot of commitment to the issue, but little sharing. I would love to talk about that more later and how Catalent has approached that, because we do share. So we'll come back. But there is not an agreement about consistent reporting on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's a big red flag if we say we care about it. And there was one more, and I'm forgetting it now because I'm so excited about carbon and how hard it is to measure, that I'll think about in a minute, where it's an issue that's just, the growing issue of employee well-being and burnout in corporate America. It's really easy to measure it because people vote with their feet to some degree, right? They leave. But what are all the indicators in between, and how do you stop the bleed that we see now in the middle of the Great Resignation? I think that has been, it's a new challenge that I'm seeing emerging. So those are where measuring and metrics, I would say, are our challenge. I'm glad I remembered my third one.
There's a lot of pressure.
So I think that's a really important point. And you obviously, as companies that are doing all of this reporting and who everyone is expecting to come up with solutions and so on, you have some serious challenges even defining the problem and then devising metrics for measuring and then coming up with solutions. And I think another challenge is for people who are trying to make decisions about ESG factors in investing, in employment, in various types of participation. So for example, there's, you mentioned greenwashing, and that's what they're calling this. There are a lot of companies, every company now is talking about ESG factors on their websites. They have to. But the commitment that's underneath may or may not match the rhetoric. And so and I know our students, one of the things that characterize students who are graduating today is that they are really committed to finding a company that fits with their values. And so, many of our students are going to be moving into the workplace and looking for companies that are actually walking the talk, as opposed to just putting fancy words on their websites. So you've hinted at a few of these factors, but what should, and as an investor, if I decide that I want to, I want my company to invest in greener things, or if I'm a venture capitalist and I want to do impact investing and I want to invest in not necessarily ESG companies that define themselves that way, but companies in various industries that are behaving in the most responsible possible way with respect to ESG. What sorts of things should I be looking for?
Well, I guess I throw a couple of thoughts at you in the audience. I said, one, if a cigarette company or an oil company produces a 1,000-page ESG report, that doesn't necessarily, that maybe doesn't check your box, so you have to look in terms of, first, I think, what does this company do? Can you get your head around it? Can you understand what they're trying to do as a company? And does it make sense? So we look at ourselves and we think we can affect people's lives with technology. We think, all is evidence here. You're not in a classroom. You're all able to learn remotely. That's one example. We're able to work remotely, so keeping COVID from spreading. There's lots of benefits to technology that we won't go spend a whole lot of time on, but we think that the technology really makes a difference in our world. Now, I'll tell you that you go look at this 140-page report that's out there. And it's all kinds of measures, right? And so we try to measure diversity. We have diversity metrics in there. You may agree or disagree that they're the right metrics, to our earlier conversation, but we're trying. We're measuring all kinds of different emissions, water use, energy use, and we are trying to get to scope 3, right? We're trying to understand that part of it and have an impact on that. So we use these science-based technology standards, and we're trying to give something. We're trying to measure something that's real. And we're holding ourselves accountable. And you can see in our data multi-years of measuring. Some measures are brand new. We've only started measuring them this last year. And you'll see some of those gaps, and then you'll see where we started measuring some things as we get into Shanna's point, as we get better at measuring and understanding what we want to measure. So we didn't measure it before, but we're measuring it now. Other things we were measuring before, and we can keep the story going. And so you can look at, we measure by country, by, emissions. We're looking at, all tons of materials that we're using, by country, by organization, et cetera. So you got to read these things, right? If you're interested in this topic and this is important to you, the information from most companies, not all companies, and certainly not all organizations produce this type of documentation. But these are things you can look at, and don't be surprised when you get there. Oh, I didn't know that. So I would just tell you to do your homework, and chances are you're going to get down to 5 or 6 places you're thinking about working, or they're thinking about hiring you. And so it's not like you have to research thousands of companies to figure out, where you want to go. So I would make it something that you take a look at and say, look, do I understand the company, what they do, what their broader mission is, how they think about the world, the impact they're trying to have on the world. And then beneath that, do I believe what they're saying? And so as Deidre was saying, are they walking the talk? And I think it's really, really important for you to do your own due diligence, so that you're not, work someplace for 6 months and figure out that suddenly then that this is not a company that aligns with your values.
I would add part of the research I think you can do when you go in for your interview. Well, one, Glassdoor is really powerful in this age of social media. And this workforce cares about purpose. And we link our ESG external investor strategy, we translate it into purpose for our people. And so go to Glassdoor, and is there a strong discussion about values and purpose and these social issues, social justice and climate in particular? You will see it or you will not. And it's a pretty quick review. Secondly, when you interview for a job, I would say if a company that is committed, like we work on integrating our values and therefore our ESG performance into every cell, brick, behavior decision that we make. That's what we say, which means your recruitment, your talent acquisition contact should talk to you out of the box if they're serious about the values of the company and how climate and social justice matter, because that's what this workforce cares about. So I think that honestly, at this point, if you don't hear about it in your first or second interview with the company, or you can't find it on Glassdoor, I'll let you decide what that conclusion is. But I believe that's a really great litmus test about walking the walk, is when the company introduces itself to you, do they lead with their values and show you the proof points of how they operate within their values? So that would be my idea.
Okay, super. Thank you. I'm looking at some questions now. Here's an interesting one from Joel. What have been your most successful strategies for implementing ESG mindfulness to decision-making processes and investment analysis at different levels of leadership?
You want to go first this time,
I feel like taking a stab at that. Sure, Al.
I can.
Okay.
As someone who's been doing corporate, this is my third company doing a version of corporate responsibility or ESG. The tone for this starts at the top, and I really didn't love that. Like, I want to, there is definitely a grassroots employee component, and it is getting stronger. The employees have more and more of a voice in a company, but commitment from the top is critical. And so I know that when I came to Catalent as its first corporate responsibility officer 5 years ago, I really assessed, like, is this CEO serious? Why or why not? And I saw where they were definitely committed to me, and also there were gaps. How seriously do you take this ESG thing, this corporate responsibility thing? Is it philanthropy and volunteering, or is it reorganizing your entire supply chain around scope 3? And I figured out a way to get my CEO in a room with other CEOs who we are a 6-year-old public company. And so the maturity of our company, including with this ESG social impact discussion, was at an earlier level than the 2 other companies I had worked for before. And I understood that my CEO needed to get in a room where it was safe, close the door, and talk to other CEOs. And so I would say that was probably at early stage the best strategy. And he brought along the entire C-suite. That's my first example. I have others, but I'm super aware of time right now and making sure you guys have questions. So the answer to that question is different for diversity and inclusion, because it's much more coming from the grassroots. And if we have time or another time, I'm happy to share the strategies with diversity and inclusion, which were different than the strategies with climate and human rights and other issues.
Okay, so let's let that be your next question, because we have a ton of questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But here's one about scope 3. So regarding scope 3, what are some ways you can encourage suppliers and partners in supporting industries to report their ESG metrics? So how do you work with your suppliers and your partners? And it must be kind of overwhelming to be responsible for them in the first place, right? How do you do that?
Yeah, we have thousands of suppliers, and they're all around the world and basically every country. And so we have very stringent requirements we ask of our suppliers. We're asking them to monitor what they're doing, set goals, understand where they are in the continuum of focusing on the environment. And so, because again, we are attempting, and to all that Shannon was saying about the difficulty of it, we are attempting to look to understand it. And we've set goals around scope 3, trying to impact our suppliers, because we know when you're the final supplier, right, the final assembler of products, right, so whether or not you're Ford Motor Company or Boeing or whoever it is that you're manufacturing something, you think about Walmart or whoever it is, the final buyer situation, you have a lot of influence over your supply chain, right? They want to do business with you. You're the big gorilla. You have the money, you have the influence, and so you ask them to perform in certain ways, and you let them know if they don't, our business relationship will be broken. Now you got to give them time to adjust, and everybody's trying to adjust to the increasing standards too, right? The standards change all the time, right? They're rarely relaxed. They're often, yearly, or at least every couple of years, they're increased in some form or fashion, or another requirement added as other holes in the bucket are identified. So we do feel the responsibility to, influence our entire supply chain and make sure that they're behaving in the best way, both on all factors, ESG factors. And you can read stories, right? No matter what, you can't fail on any of those as a supplier, and we can't be seen as encouraging suppliers that don't behave. We can't say, hey, it wasn't our fault, we didn't know. Or you can say we didn't know, but at some point you got to take action, right? If somebody's doing something that's not proper, you can't just throw your hands up. That's not us. That's these other guys that are doing it. So I would just say that for us, we feel that responsibility. There's rarely a time when our chairman doesn't bring it up in an all hands meeting, some aspect of ESG that we're going to focus on, or he's focusing on that particular time. He certainly does it when he talks to our shareholders, to all the previous conversations, and when he's talking to us, just internally, he brings it up. So I think it's really important that, we, in our position, that we have to make sure that our supply chain, to the extent that we can, is behaving and then reporting back to us what they're doing or not doing, and where they maybe need our help. So again, we're doing some things that we think are cutting edge, and we gotta make sure that we're sharing that with our supply chain.
Okay, super. So thank you. I think that was really helpful. I think we first saw this after 9/11. When all of a sudden OEMs became responsible for every piece of, security became such a huge issue, and companies suddenly became responsible for every link in their supply chain. And it was really overwhelming at first, but really companies have become very good at doing that. And so that kind of integration too is a way to kind of raise the water level of all the boats, right, globally. So, those are important efforts to undertake. So Shannon, what can you tell us about DE&I?
So first I must say, I incorporated D&I under the team that I now lead a year ago. So I was corporate responsibility, the first diversity director of the company was somebody else. So I'm going to tell their story and don't want to take credit for that. I can tell you where we are now. The strategy. So for D&I, the CEO would say, and I was in a very healthy discussion with him yesterday, the CEO and our ALs, our business and marketing folks, started coming back saying customers are saying that we don't reflect the patients they serve. And our leadership doesn't reflect the diversity of the healthcare system and the patients who are served by the healthcare system. Is it true? Could it be that Catalent doesn't share our values because the leadership team, including the board of directors, did not seem diverse enough to customers? And around the same time, and this was 7, 8, 9 years ago, and again predates me and actually predates when Catalent was a public company, but. And the same questions started coming from especially high potential employee candidates who the CEO was in interviewing, and they would have been diverse in a variety of ways, would say, I don't see myself on your team. Are you sure Catalent is the place for me? And the CEO understood that Catalent was kind of a conglomerate of many companies that he was pulling together before it went public, and understood that we had an issue, that our customers and our people didn't believe that we represented them. So I think that was a little bit of what started. The question was strategy. They hired someone, again, my predecessor, to manage diversity inclusion. One person it's a big job for one person. Now the team is a bit larger, but and her decision was to start the employee resource groups. She, understanding, I think, that she had limited bandwidth, she focused at the very top. So it kind of is the way that I did, getting the CEO in the right spaces to speak at a more mature level about the workforce and the emerging issues of inclusion and diversity. And at the same time, she released the power of making it safe for communities to form and come together and talk about their experiences as what would be considered diverse employees. And so When George Floyd's murder happened, our employee resource groups were maybe a year old at that point. I mean, we were very, very new in the journey. I think that helps us because different than companies who've been around a while, yet talking about diversity inclusion, we baked D&I and that gap analysis into our public entrance. And so employees, we've been very transparent about maturing in this way. But those employee resource groups, I think, and again, the credit goes to our CEO. He called them to him and his C-suite and leadership company and began to model discussions and vulnerability, he and his team, as, talking about what privilege means, right? Talking about George Floyd was a terrible moment, but we're going to miss the point if we don't see the history and where inequity has emerged in our system and how it's playing out at Catalent. And yes, there's a lack of inclusion at Catalent sometimes, and there is a lack of equity. And so I think that the leadership meeting with the employee resource groups and doing so publicly so that we would have these town halls where we would discuss, created a tone that said, we're going to talk about this at Catalent. And the feedback we get from employees is that kind of blew their mind, that their experience in other places to have real conversations, it was different than other companies that they were coming from when they joined Catalent. In fact, on our employee engagement surveys, and engagement is a very important way to measure diversity and inclusion. I see some other questions there. You can't just look at your diversity, which is the data. Inclusion, we represent by engagement and breaking that data down. But D&I is tied for first place with our patient first value as the most engaging cultural element at Catalent. Our people believe that we mean it when we're saying we're going to turn ourselves inside out and model a journey together to become a more inclusive company. When I started a year ago, though, what I saw was my predecessor had done their best in raising the vibration, right? Raising the discussion, creating a safe space to have real talk, right? With the highest levels of the company. But there is also real systems work to do, right? How do we recruit people? How are our systems of recruitment, hiring, promotion, do they perpetuate inequity or do they promote diversity, right? Or equity? And so I think for me, part of the strategy has been to harness the power of the discussions in this moment that happened for us as a new company and the trust that our people have that we mean it, we as a leadership team mean it, that we are working to close those gaps. I feel like I'm sprinting a marathon to make sure. And so the strategy has been we've got a D&I council, we've got a group of leaders all over the world who are so inspired by our C-suite as leaders, speaking honestly after the murder of George Floyd with the company about where our gaps were. We put all our data out there that we could gather. You can look at our CR report and find the D&I numbers. And we report it at a more transparent level than a lot of our customers because we said, we're going to be honest. We're starting here and we are committing to get better. So the strategy that worked was the CEO and the C-suite really turned on our leadership, which is really hard because often the C-suite will be committed, but you've got to, I call it the middle mushy management. Like, how do you get the people who are managing the big groups of people who aren't in the room where it happens, right, to get on board? I think our CEO has made it his priority to not just commit to closing diversity and equity gaps, but to make it clear he expects his leaders to do so. We make it clear it's going to be awkward if you're doing hard work on where you sit and you're influencing an organization and you look at your teams or how you're promoting people, it's going to be uncomfortable. And we are all, as the top 500 leaders, this is how it went down, are going to be uncomfortable together and look at this and own it. And so I think, again, that tone has happened. We formed different diversity councils. We have geographic councils of leaders who then connect with those employee resource groups and contextualize. And this is what part of my trip to Europe was last week. Take the corporate D&I strategy and commitment and contextualize it for each country, right? And really see how each site, each business, each country feeds into the goals and metrics that we have, but really leverage the firepower of the leadership in each of those countries to promote that strategy. But without the most successful piece, I think, was our CEO giving the employees the power to come together and speak and be honest and not try to bottle that up, not shy away from the hard conversations. And that's what I share with every D&I colleague I have in other companies, is just the worst thing you could do is try to not have the uncomfortable conversation. So that's a little bit of, I know it's more rhetorical. I can go down into like literal strategies if we have time, but I think that's where a lot of companies are. It certainly is where Catalent is. So.
Super. Well, I think that all of us have those questions. It's pretty unlikely for most of us that we're going to walk into a situation where all those things have been worked out. Everything has, the problem has been solved. You know, everywhere. I know in Brene Brown's own team, she talks about this a lot. She herself on her team is dealing with these issues. So the question is not really the solution. Have solutions been implemented, but is the dialogue there and the uncomfortable conversations? And I think, you know, so many students today have expressed interest in this kind of questions. So for all of you, look for the uncomfortable conversations. Are people willing to have them? Because that's how improvement takes place. And then Al, I have one for you particularly that's pretty interesting. How do multinational companies cope with different ESG standards in different countries and cultures while maintaining the same level of product quality and customer service across the board? Because that east-west split that Shannon described, you're standing on the middle of it with your offices in North Carolina and Beijing. So tell us a little bit, how does a multinational corporation navigate or manage that kind of situation?
I think what you end up doing is you have to pick the hardest standard to measure yourself against from wherever it comes, because eventually the stuff just moves around the world very, very fast. So you would probably say that the climate focus has been primarily come out of Europe, right? That they've been probably leaning much more and earlier in the climate change and at the governmental level much quicker than others have. And so their desires and their requirements, hit us right on the back of the head, very quickly. D&I was probably more important here than other places. Governance probably pretty important here than maybe in China. So I think when you look at China, again, you probably say they're probably a little bit slower to the climate change world. I mean, given their population and their development stage. And so you can see that's an example where the requirements from North America primarily, from Europe primarily, has changed everything and how we do things as a company, right back at the kind of the headquarter level, right? So that's an example where that's come across. Same thing from the D&I focus that's come up from the United States based on our history. We talked about it earlier in the presentation and discussion around what happened here just went everywhere in the world and became a much more important issue around the world. So I think these things that at the speed of social media, you can't afford to pick the lowest common denominator on any of this. You have to pick the greatest common factor all the time. And that's where you set your standard. And in fact, if you're really doing your job right, you're anticipating where the standards are going. You're trying to get ahead of the standards. You're trying to be, and as a company that's particularly multinational, you want to be the leader in these discussions. You don't have them drag you, across the, kicking and screaming. Wherever we can, we want to be in that room, or we're helping set the standards and promote a higher standard for what everybody does. And at the same time, try to keep it real, right? And I think a lot of the time when you look at to go back to our ESG report, all 140 pages of facts and figures. I mean, we're trying to keep it real. We're trying to pick real, and the reason it's so thick is there's so many metrics and so many things that we're measuring. We talk about, employee engagement. So we have a system called Lenovo Listens, where we do an annual survey, and we publish that. The engagement scores are in our report, and over years we publish our turnover data by country, right? And so you can see what's going on. We publish as many different stats, so you can look at this and say, and so going back to your previous or earlier question about employment, okay, where do I want to work? Go look at the data, see, find out what the company, you can go to Glassdoor, that's also another place for sure. But I mean, we're very transparent. We're putting it all out there for you to go look at. And then you can ask more intelligent questions even when you come in. But going back to your original question, or question from this session would be, we have to be ahead of the standards. We have to pick the hardest standard to go after, because eventually this standard is going to become, probably the world standard at some point, whatever the toughest one is.
Well, I think that's a great answer. And, I think what we're hearing here, since we do need to wrap up, as much as we would love to, probably all of us, continue this conversation, our time is up. And so, to be respectful of your evening, I think that one thing that I'm taking away from this is that if I want to invest or be employed by a company that's behaving responsibly with respect to ESG, I need to do my homework. I need to do some reading. I need to know what the metrics are. I need to make sure that there are metrics and the metrics are published, and that the performance against the metrics is published. Transparency, obviously, is going to be a really good indicator for all of us in making decisions about this. So we could talk forever about ESG, I have no doubt, but thank you very much, Alan.
Deidre, can I say one thing to the students?
Sure.
See, I know we're going. This is an employee moment. If you guys care about this, walking in that interview and asking, just do it. Just see what happens. Right now is a time, like the impact of the employee who's not in the C-suite is higher than it's ever been in this kind of moment. And I just want to encourage you to use it, please. So that's all. Yes, we can have metrics and reports, and Al and I will do that. We'll keep doing that. But you have a role that you can play just by putting the hotlight on these employers, because they need you right now. We're all fighting for you right now. And so you have an opportunity to at least start the conversation. So sorry, Deirdre, I know you're wrapping us up. Thank you for letting me interrupt you.
Well, I love that point. And, when we talked earlier, you also mentioned this is such a new field, right? ESG, there's no ESG 101. And what that means is that people like Shannon, who 10 years ago, the job she has now wasn't even defined. And so, so people who are beginning to take courses on this kind of topic, who are becoming educated in this area, there's going to be a demand in companies for people who have that knowledge. So if you're a senior, you still got the spring semester, and if you're earlier in your coursework than that, you've got some time to begin to educate yourself and walk in the door being able to say, hey, I can contribute to this conversation. I have skills, I have knowledge. Get an internship that will give you some exposure to that, because this issue is, many of you asked, is it going away after the pandemic? And I assume I speak for our speakers this evening in saying, no, it's not going away. This is going to get bigger and not smaller. And so, I think there's a lot of hope for students who are interested in this area and committed to it. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, again, like I live in Fort Worth, right? So my company's in Mooresville. You can work, remotely almost anywhere these days. And so, whether or not you're an ESG or not, you can get involved in whatever your company is doing, right? So even if we return to normal, the normal part of this, we sort of have a lot more people in our headquarters office, but we have hundreds and hundreds of people that are working remotely, that are salespeople or account people or what have you. And we still want to be involved, and we are involved. And even though we have other jobs, so you don't, even if ESG is not your, the focus and what you want to be involved in, but you care about it, right? Maybe it's not your prime thing. You want to be in marketing or finance or accounting or some other function you really like, but ESG is important to you. We're all involved in ESG, right? No matter what your function is. And we're all the arms and legs of people like Shannon that kind of, we communicate up to her, our concerns, and then she responds and she tells us what we're doing, and that kind of a give and take among the functions, and because people want to know and they want to be involved, and so don't take it at what's actually happening necessarily at the headquarters, what's happening there. You just got to figure out if you're passionate about it it goes back to Shannon about it, you get involved, right? No matter where you are. And if nobody's doing anything, right, then start doing something. And again, even if it's not your full-time job, a lot of companies carve out time for people to do things or special projects, and go do those things and have an impact on your local community. And if your company doesn't care, go find another employer or do something locally, right? Do something on your own. So there's lots of ways for all of us to be involved. But I think most companies, to Deidre's point, are not. This isn't just a fad. I mentioned this is our 15th annual ESG report. Right. So, we did it before it was cool, and we're going to continue to do it way after, it's just mainstream. It's just part of who we are. And so I throw that out at everybody just to consider.
Any last words, Shannon?
No, I think Al put us on a great final note. So just other than thank you, this has been a delight, and to come back to Texas and engage with you all. So,
well, next time we'll get you back on campus.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you so much to our speakers, and we will see you next time.